My husband and I have been playing a game of tag for 5 years, but the rules have turned him into something terrifying. It started after we saw the comedy film Tag in 2018. For those of you who are unaware, it's based on a real story about a group of friends who played an endless version of the children's game. After years of this gradually worsening hell, I shudder every time I remember the concept that inspired my husband, Elliot. "Let's do it," he said. "Sorry," I replied, smirking. "Right here." "No," he laughed, rolling his eyes. "Not that. Tag. A never-ending game of tag." We live in the same house, so I mean, it probably wouldn't be as thrilling as the film," I said. "We just end up sitting on the sofa, constantly tagging each other in a back and forth slapping match." Elliot pondered, tapping his lips. He was always a passionate person. Once he became hyper-fixated on something, it was hard to deter him. And I loved watching his face scrunch up as the cognitive cogs whirred away. But this time, my amusement at his fixation would be short-lived. "Okay," Elliot eventually said as we hopped into the car. "We could make the game interesting. Only one person can be tagged per day. The game pauses until midnight, at which point whoever's it can tag the other." I laughed. "Midnight? Well, I think we both know that the tagging is going to happen when we're both in bed, don't we?" My husband smiled. It wasn't an unpleasant smile, to my eyes. But everything seems different in retrospect. "Who's saying I'd still be lying next to you?" he said. Even then, when I still thought his suggestion to be light-hearted, the way he said that sentence set my hairs on end. "No, we're not going to be an old married couple with separate beds. Why don't we make the starting point 6 p.m, I asked. "Okay. Want to begin?" "Sure," I said. "Who's it first?" "You," Elliot replied. "I'll be a gentleman and tag. You're it," I squealed, laughing as I tapped his shoulder playfully. Elliot smiled, keeping his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "And it's 8 p.m. I guess I'll have to wait until tomorrow to get you back. You're going to be so easy to catch." And the next day he proved that. At 6 p.m, my husband silently emerged from a hiding spot behind the sofa and tagged me. I yelped, clutching my pounding chest. "I didn't even hear you come home." "I didn't go to the office today," Elliot giggled. "I've been hiding there for hours." When I arrived home the next day, I waited for my husband to walk through the door so I could have my revenge. 6 p.m. came and went. At 7, I texted Elliot to ask when he'd be home. He responded that he was sleeping at the office to avoid being tagged. And when he didn't show up the day after, I told him that this game might cost us our relationship if I were never to see him again. His response infuriated me. "Nice try. Ultimatums won't work." When I told him that he'd better come home, his response sparked a ripple of shivers across my body. "Oh, but I am home, darling. You just haven't seen me yet." Then I heard the slightest creak from the cupboard beneath the sink. When I opened the double doors, there was my husband. And ordinarily that would have been a funny sight, wouldn't it? Just a game of tag that had reached dizzying heights of ridiculousness. But you didn't see his face. That wasn't Elliot. Not my Elliot. Bulging and blinking bloodshot eyes. Unhinged smile frothing at the lips. That giggle. Ever since he suggested we play tag, the man I knew was gone. Throughout lockdown, given that we were living in such close quarters, the game did become slightly easier. But Elliot lost a piece of himself with every passing day. I tried to get him to hyperfixate on something else. Still, whenever one of us had been tagged and the game paused, my husband returned to his normal self. That was when I decided I was going to stop playing. So Elliot tagged me, and I didn't return the tag on the following day. Things returned to normal. But then one day, at a local restaurant, he brought up the topic again. "Lisa," Elliot started. "What?" I asked. "I'm right in front of you," he said. "Why won't you tag me?" I sighed. "You were making me uncomfortable, Elliot. You weren't yourself." A fleeting glint in his eye sent a weighty lump of fear cascading to the pit of my stomach. It was a glimmer of cruelty that had been burgeoning beneath the surface of his cold, unfeeling eyes for 3 years. The look that I'd hoped would go away if I were to stop playing his haunted game. "This won't do at all, Lisa," he whispered in a voice hardly his own. "I've been patient. I thought you were planning the ultimate move. I'm going to have to make a new rule. When someone is it, they must make an effort, otherwise the other player becomes it." I scoffed. "Look, I'd happily play the game if you could be normal about it." Elliot smiled. "Of course. I won't take it too seriously. It's fun, Lisa. That's why I want to play." This was a little over a year ago, and it was anything but fun after that. I couldn't decide whether I feared hunting Elliot or being hunted by him. On one hand, the thought of my husband lurking around any corner in my home filled me with an unyielding sense of horror. On the other hand, whenever I was being chased, I felt genuine terror at what would happen when he tagged me. And one day, my fear was justified. "Elliot!" I cried. I was lying on the floor shivering after my husband had tagged me, but tag doesn't begin to cover it. Elliot thumped me in the arm with a cricket bat, thumped it so hard that I couldn't move it. I would later find out that my arm was broken. "New rule," Elliot said, cracking his neck in a horrid and human way. "Every tag is more creative than the last." Shaking uncontrollably, I finally snapped. I'd given the man so many chances, but physical abuse, that was the line. He'd crossed it, and there was no coming back from that. "It's over," I said. "You're not the man I married." Elliot froze, and something inexplicably horrifying happened. His eyes blackened. The newly darkened pupils merged with the whites of his eyes. "Do you think the game ends if we end?" Elliot asked, sinisterly snickering. "You're still it." "What's happened to you, Elliot?" I wailed, clutching my broken arm and sliding away from the unhinged figure who loomed above me. "We're not playing anymore." "Oh? Okay. New rule," he said. "When I next tag you, the game's over." "No. Leave me alone. I'm it," I whispered. Remember the rule. You only stay it if you make an effort," Elliot gleefully said, striding towards me. "Are you going to make an effort?" I ran. Left arm hanging limply by my side, I used my right hand to scoop my phone out of my pocket, and I called my sister from the side of a busy road. She urged me to call the police, but Elliot had fled when officers reached the house. I couldn't stop thinking about the blackness that spread across his eyes, so I ended up on an online forum talking about dark pupils and altered personalities. One user's comment sent chills through my body. "He's got the black book. He'll only stop playing when one of you dies." Terrified, I decided that it wasn't safe for me to live with my sister. If the anonymous commenter were correct, then Elliot's talk about the game being over would surely have spelled my end. I moved to a lakeside cabin under a different name, intending to stay far away from Elliot until I could figure out the next course of action. I woke at 4 on one particularly wintry morning in December. The sound of giggling filled the lakeside cabin, and I trembled. Walking to the edge of the upper balcony, I looked below to see a head peering over the back of the sofa. "Peekaboo," Elliot whispered. I screamed and hauled my half-frozen body towards the stairs, barreling towards the front door. But as my hand clutched the handle, something clutched me. I turned to see Elliot on the floor, propped up by hands and legs in a low crouching position. The fingers on one of his hands were curled viciously around my ankle, and he was grinning, that awful grin. "Tag," he whispered. "Game over." His mouth opened, revealing numerous rows of unnaturally jagged, junky teeth. Poised to pounce with a vehement look in his eyes, Elliot chuckled again. I screeched, swinging my foot squarely at its jaw. As the demonic man recoiled, I fled from the lakeside house and drove far away. That was months ago. I know Elliot's still out there. The game's not over. Like the online forum user said, he'll only stop playing when one of you dies.